Leonard, we've reviewed messages showing your laned assignments and payment discussions.
Everybody talks about shifts. That doesn't mean anything.
Once is a mistake. Twice is suspicious. Leonard Darnell George did this 4 times in a single month, collected $68,000, and left a price list for the border written in his own phone. He's about to find out investigators read every message.
The messages mentioned specific lanes and specific times.
People send all kinds of texts. I don't know what you're referring to.
He would not get the chance to talk his way out of it. Within 48 hours, federal agents would seize his service phone, his personal phone, and a backup device hidden inside a kitchen drawer in his Chula Vista home. Inside those phones, investigators found a price list: $17,000 per vehicle, $68,000 for a single June run of 4 cars. 222 pounds of methamphetamine recovered from 1 secondary inspection on 1 ordinary Monday morning. 1 federal inspection lane, 1 officer with a badge and a schedule. Quick question before we go any further. How many people pass through a checkpoint every single day trusting that the man in the booth is on their side? Drop your guess in the comments. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. We cover the cases the mainstream press won't touch every single week. And the case you are about to hear has details that did not make the local news. Leonard Darnell George was born in February of 1982 at Sharp Memorial Hospital in San Diego, California. His father, Marcus George, worked 26 years as a diesel mechanic for the San Diego Metropolitan Transit System, servicing the buses that ran the 43 line down through National City and into Chula Vista. His mother, Patrice Renee George, was a school cafeteria manager at Imperial Avenue Elementary, the kind of woman who knew every child's name and exactly which ones came to school hungry on Mondays. Leonard was the middle of 3, an older sister, Tanya, who would later become a postal clerk in El Cajon, a younger brother, Jared, who joined the Navy at 19 and was stationed in Norfolk by 21. The George lived in a 3-bedroom ranch off Imperial Avenue in the Mountain View neighborhood of southeast San Diego, a working-class block of stucco houses and chain-link fences 15 minutes north of the Mexican border. From the time he could read a map, Leonard knew where the line was. His mother used to drive the family down through San Ysidro to visit cousins in Tijuana on Sundays. Leonard remembered the line of cars stretching back for what felt like miles. He remembered the men in green uniforms walking between the lanes with mirrors mounted on long poles. He remembered the dogs. He played Pop Warner football for the Imperial Avenue Cardinals from age 9 to 13. He was never the biggest kid on the field, but he had a fullback's body and a linebacker's instinct for hitting. His coach, a retired Marine named Wendell Briggs, told Patrice at the end of the 8th grade season that Leonard had something the Marine Corps would want one day. Patrice did not want the Marine Corps. She wanted Leonard to go to college. He went to Lincoln High School in southeast San Diego, graduating in 2000. His yearbook photo shows a young man with a neat fade haircut, a black polo shirt, and a closed-mouth half-smile. The caption under his name reads, "Most likely to get the job done." He worked weekends at a Jack in the Box on Euclid Avenue from the time he turned 16 until the day he graduated, taking home $4.75 an hour, plus whatever shift meal he could finish before clock out. He enrolled at Southwestern College in Chula Vista in the fall of 2000, declared an associate's program in administration of justice, and worked nights as a stocker at the Vaughn's grocery store on Broadway in El Cajon. He finished his associate's degree in 2003, transferred to San Diego State to complete a bachelor's in criminal justice administration, and finished in 2005 with a grade point average of 3.1. He applied to U.S. Customs and Border Protection in the summer of 2006. The application process took 11 months. Background check, polygraph, medical clearance, physical fitness assessment, Spanish language proficiency evaluation, which he passed comfortably after 16 years of growing up in a city where Spanish was the second language of every aisle in every grocery store he had ever stocked. He reported to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, on March 14, 2007. 89 days of training. He was 25 years old, His instructor wrote in his final evaluation that Cadet George demonstrated, quote, consistent attention to procedural detail, sound judgment under pressure, and an above-average aptitude for the law enforcement aspects of customs work. The same evaluation noted he, quote, communicates well with the public and presents a professional appearance at all times. He returned to San Diego in June of 2007 and reported for duty at the San Ysidro port of entry. His starting salary as a CBP officer was $46,200. He was sworn in on July 9th in a ceremony at the sector headquarters in downtown San Diego. His mother pinned the badge on his chest. His father took a Polaroid. He met Vanessa Marie Holcomb at a 4th of July barbecue in 2008. She was a registered dental hygienist at a practice in National City. They married in October of 2010 at a small ceremony in the gazebo at Mission Bay Park. Their first daughter, Amaris, was born in 2012. Their son, Jordan, in 2015. By 2017, Leonard George had been promoted to GS-11, was earning $71,000 a year before overtime, and was working primary inspection at the San Ysidro port of entry. He had 11 years on the badge. He had 2 children. He had a 30-year mortgage on a 4-bedroom house in eastern Chula Vista. He had what every annual performance review since 2008 had described as a fully successful record of service. He had also, by his own later admission, been watching the lane traffic for 11 years. The San Ysidro port of entry sits at the southern terminus of Interstate 5, where the freeway runs out of country and the steel border fence begins. It is the busiest land border crossing in the Western Hemisphere. On a typical day, 70,000 vehicles and 20,000 pedestrians cross north into the United States. On a heavy weekend, those numbers climb above 90,000 vehicles and 30,000 pedestrians. The port operates 26 northbound vehicle lanes spread across 2 facilities, El Chaparral and the Virginia Avenue crossing. Each lane is staffed by a CBP officer in a primary inspection booth. The officer's job is the same in every lane. Receive the vehicle, check identification, run the license plate through a federal database, ask the driver where they are coming from, where they are going, what they are bringing into the country, make a decision, wave the vehicle through, or refer it to secondary inspection, where K-9 teams, X-ray equipment, and specialized officers conduct a more thorough search. The decision takes, on average, between 30 and 90 seconds. Multiply that by 70,000 vehicles a day. Divide by 26 lanes. Each officer on each shift makes between 2,000 and 3,000 decisions about whether to let a vehicle into the United States. The system is built on layers, random secondary referrals, database alerts triggered by license plate scans, behavioral cues that officers are trained to recognize, random K-9 walkthroughs of the primary lanes, hidden surveillance, random rotation of which officer is assigned to which lane on which shift. But the system has gaps. The same officer can be assigned to the same lane for hours at a time. Shift assignments are posted in advance in the muster room, including which officer is in which lane and during which hour. Officers know, before they arrive, exactly where they will be standing and when. For a smuggling organization moving methamphetamine north from Sinaloa, that information is the most valuable intelligence on the border. If you know which lane an officer will be working, and you know the officer is willing to take a payment, you no longer have to gamble. You no longer have to time your run for shift change. You no longer have to send decoy vehicles to map the day's secondary patterns. You just have to drive to a specific lane within a specific hour and hand a passport to a specific man. That is the asset Leonard George controlled. Not just his badge, not just his uniform. The specific information of which lane he would be standing in, and for how long, on any given shift. It was an asset worth, according to text messages later recovered from his personal phone, $17,000 per vehicle. The trust the United States government placed in him every time he clocked in was the same trust placed in every other officer working primary inspection at every other port of entry across the country. A system that processes nearly 500,000 people across its land borders every single day. A system that depends, fundamentally, on the assumption that the man in the booth is on the right side of the line. The first message arrived in October of 2021. According to the federal indictment later returned by a grand jury in the Southern District of California, the contact came through an intermediary, a former classmate of Leonard's from Lincoln High School, who had spent most of the previous decade in and out of state custody for trafficking offenses. The classmate's role was simple. He introduced Leonard to a man identified in court documents only as co-conspirator 1, a representative of a Sinaloa-based methamphetamine distribution network operating out of Tijuana. The terms of the arrangement were laid out across a series of encrypted text exchanges between October and December of 2021. Leonard would notify the organization, at the start of each shift, which lane he was assigned to and during which hours. The organization would have 1 hour from the time Leonard sent the message to get a vehicle to his lane. Leonard would waive the vehicle through primary inspection without referring it to secondary. The payment was $17,000 per vehicle, delivered in cash through a courier, usually within 72 hours of the crossing. The first vehicle crossed in late December of 2021. It was a white 1998 Toyota Tacoma pickup truck with California plates. The driver, a 23-year-old woman from Tijuana with no criminal record and a valid border crossing card, handed Leonard her documents at approximately 4:12 in the afternoon. Leonard ran the plate. He looked at her face. He looked at the documents. He handed them back. He waved her through. The Tacoma was carrying, according to text messages later recovered, approximately 47 pounds of crystal methamphetamine concealed in a false compartment behind the rear bench seat. Street value, at the time, on the wholesale side, was approximately $270,000. Leonard's share was $17,000, paid in unmarked 20s 3 days later in the parking lot of a Home Depot in National City. He spent the cash slowly. A new transmission for his wife's 2014 Honda Pilot, a flat-screen television for the living room, a weekend trip to Las Vegas with his brother, who flew in from Norfolk for his 32nd birthday. None of the purchases were extravagant. None of them triggered any reporting requirement. None of them appeared on any tax return because none of the cash ever touched a bank. The second vehicle crossed in January of 2022. The third crossed 2 weeks later. By March of 2022, Leonard had let 4 vehicles through his lane. The pace accelerated through the spring. By June, the organization was running multiple vehicles per shift on the days he worked. Text messages recovered later showed the rhythm. George, June 14th, 6:51 a.m. Lane 8 from 0700 to 1100. Then Lane 4, 1200 to 1500. Co-conspirator 1, June 14th, 6:53 a.m. 3 today, first one 20 minutes. George, June 14th, 6:54 m. Roger. That single day, June 14th, 3 vehicles crossed through Leonard George's lane, carrying approximately 140 pounds of methamphetamine between them. 3 days later, the organization paid Leonard $51,000 in cash. 3 weeks after that, on June 28th, a 4th vehicle crossed. The payment for the 4-vehicle June run came to $68,000. He kept the money in a safe in the closet of the guest bedroom. He told Vanessa it was overtime pay he was setting aside for the kids' college accounts. He told her the same thing in February. He told her the same thing in April. He told her the same thing in May. By the end of June of 2022, Leonard George had accepted, according to the bribery counts later returned in his indictment, more than $160,000 in cash payments for the 11 vehicles he had waived through his lane over a period of 7 months. Each of those vehicles carried on average between 40 and 70 pounds of methamphetamine. Roughly 500 pounds of methamphetamine had crossed the border through Lane 8, Lane 4, and Lane 2 of the San Ysidro port of entry during the months Leonard George was working primary inspection. None of it had been referred to secondary. None of it had been seized. None of it had been detected by the system the United States government had spent 23 years building since the September attacks to make sure exactly this kind of thing could not happen. The trust the United States placed in Leonard Darnell George was, by the summer of 2022, worth approximately $17,000 per vehicle. He had a price list, he had a schedule, he had a phone, and in the phone, he had a record. He never deleted the messages. The morning of February 28, 2022, was a Monday. Leonard George reported for duty at the San Ysidro port of entry at 5:45 a.m. for a 6-to-2 shift. He was assigned to Lane 6 for the first 4 hours, then rotating to Lane 2 from 1000 to 1400. At 6:18 a.m., he sent a text message from his personal phone to co-conspirator 1. The message read, Lane 6 till 10, Lane 2 till 14, 2-car window starts now. At 7:41 a.m., a silver 2009 Ford Expedition with Baja California plates pulled into Lane 6. The driver was a 44-year-old man with a valid Sentry card. Leonard processed him in approximately 50 seconds and waved him through. The Expedition, according to later investigation, was carrying approximately 62 pounds of methamphetamine in a compartment built into the spare tire well. At 9:26 a.m., a second vehicle approached Lane 6. A blue 2012 Chevrolet Suburban, also with Baja California plates, driven by a 28-year-old man with a valid border crossing card. Leonard accepted the documents. He looked up to verify the driver matched the photograph. And that was when the system screen at his booth flashed red. The license plate of the Suburban had triggered an automated alert. The vehicle had been flagged in an interagency database the previous afternoon by Homeland Security Investigations as a, quote, vehicle of interest in an ongoing methamphetamine trafficking investigation operating out of Mexicali. The alert was not generated by anything Leonard had done. It was generated by intelligence developed entirely separately by an HSI task force that did not know Leonard George existed. The alert required, under CBP standard operating procedure, an automatic referral to secondary inspection. Leonard George had a choice. He could override the alert. Officers in primary inspection have limited discretion to clear flagged vehicles after a verbal interview in cases where the officer determines the alert is stale or based on misidentification. An override generates a written report and a supervisor review. But it can be done. Or he could refer the vehicle to secondary. If he overrode the alert and the vehicle was later found to be carrying narcotics, the override report would be in his file. Investigators would have a documented decision in his name to clear a flagged vehicle. The connection would be obvious within hours. If he referred the vehicle to secondary, the methamphetamine in the Suburban would be discovered. The driver would be arrested. The organization would lose the load. Leonard would not get paid for that particular vehicle, but his name would not be on any paperwork. He referred the vehicle to secondary. At 10:03 a.m., CBP officers in the secondary inspection area at San Ysidro, working with K9 teams and X-ray imaging, discovered a false floor compartment in the Suburban, running the length of the cargo area beneath the third-row seating. Inside that compartment, packaged in vacuum-sealed bricks wrapped in motor oil to defeat canine detection, was approximately 222 pounds of crystal methamphetamine. The driver was arrested on the spot. He was processed at the San Diego Metropolitan Correctional Center by that afternoon. Leonard George finished his shift. He clocked out at 14:07. He drove home to Chula Vista. He told his wife it had been a slow day. He took his son to a youth soccer practice that evening at 6:30. He did not know it yet, but the Suburban he had been forced to refer to secondary was the single most expensive decision of his career. Because the driver of that Suburban, faced with the prospect of 15 years in federal prison for the 222 pounds of methamphetamine recovered from his vehicle, made the only rational choice available to him. He started talking. The driver of the Suburban was a Mexican national named Esteban Rivera Quintero. He was 38 years old. He had 2 prior convictions in California for transportation of controlled substances. He understood the federal sentencing guidelines as well as any defense attorney would have explained them to him. Within 48 hours of his arrest, Rivera was sitting in a windowless interview room at the Homeland Security Investigations field office in downtown San Diego with a federal prosecutor, 2 HSI special agents, and a court-appointed attorney from the Federal Defender's Office. He told them everything he knew. He had been recruited 4 months earlier through a cousin in Tecate. He had driven north through San Ysidro on 3 previous occasions, always through specific lanes during specific hours, always after his dispatcher in Tijuana confirmed the lane was, quote, open. He did not know the name of the officer in the booth. He had never met him, but he knew the lane number. He knew the hour. He knew the dispatcher had told him that morning that lane 6 was good until 10. And he knew that something had gone wrong because the officer in lane 6 had referred him to secondary anyway. The HSI investigation that opened in March of 2022 was codenamed Operation Open Lane. The case agent was a 15-year veteran of HSI named Carla Ann Westerfield. Her first task was to identify the officer assigned to Lane 6 at San Ysidro on the morning of February 28th. That information was a matter of public personnel records. Leonard Darnell George. Westerfield pulled his shift assignments going back 24 months. She cross-referenced his lane assignments against every methamphetamine seizure at San Ysidro during the same period. Looking for vehicles that had crossed during George's hours through lanes he was working without being referred to secondary. The data was unhelpful by itself. Of course, no vehicles had been seized through his lane because the loads going through his lane were never being inspected. She approached the problem from the other direction. She subpoenaed cell site location data for every phone known to be associated with the trafficking organization that had run Esteban Rivera. She identified one phone number that had been in cellular contact with George's known personal number on 26 separate occasions over the previous 14 months. She obtained a federal wiretap order in May of 2022. For the next 6 weeks, federal agents listened. They heard the lane assignments. They heard the hour windows. They heard George's voice on his own phone, methodically reading off the day's schedule to a man he had never met in person, a man he knew only by a code name and a Tijuana phone number. On the morning of August 9th, 2022, federal agents executed 3 simultaneous search warrants. One at Leonard George's home in Chula Vista, one on his personal vehicle, parked in the employee lot at San Ysidro, one on his person. In the kitchen drawer beneath the silverware tray in the Chula Vista house, agents recovered a 3rd cell phone. A burner, not registered to any name, powered off but with a charged battery. When they extracted the data, they recovered 14 months of text messages, the price list, the schedules, the lane assignments, the dollar figures, 17,000, 68,000, every payment confirmed, every vehicle accounted for. He had never deleted a single message. We are heading into the prosecution now. If you have made it this far, you already understand why this case matters. Subscribe if you have not yet. We break down how the system actually catches the people who exploit it every single week. And drop a comment letting me know what you think the appropriate sentence is for an officer who sells his lane by the hour. I want to see your number before the judge reads hers. The arrest happened on the morning of August 9th, 2022, at 5:41 a.m. in the employee parking lot of the San Ysidro Port of Entry Administration building. Leonard George was wearing his service uniform. He had just stepped out of his 2019 Ford F-150 with a thermos of coffee in his left hand and his duty bag slung over his right shoulder. He was walking toward the muster room for the 6 a.m. shift briefing. 3 vehicles pulled into the lot behind him, unmarked, a black Tahoe and 2 Chevrolet Suburbans. 6 federal agents in tactical vests stenciled with the letters HSI across the chest. The lead agent was Carla Westerfield. Leonard George, he turned. He saw the vests. He saw the badges hanging from the lanyards around their necks. He saw behind them 2 uniformed CBP supervisors he had worked with for 11 years. He set the thermos on the hood of his truck. Leonard George, I have a federal warrant for your arrest. Step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them. He stepped away from the vehicle. He put his hands on his head. What is this about? It was not a question. It was a statement. A flat acknowledgement from a man who had been carrying the answer for 14 months. You know what this is about. He did not answer. We have your phone, Leonard. We have had it for 2 months. He closed his eyes for what an agent later described in a written report as approximately 4 seconds. When he opened them, he looked past Westerfield at the building behind her, the muster room, the lanes, the booths, 11 years of clocking in at 5:45 in the morning. I want a lawyer. Those were the last words Leonard Darnell George spoke to federal investigators. He was handcuffed in front of the F-150 he had paid for, partly with bribery money. He was processed at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in downtown San Diego by 8:22 that morning. His badge, the same badge his mother had pinned on his chest at the swearing-in ceremony 15 years earlier, was logged into the property room at HSI's San Diego field office at 9:06. Vanessa George learned of her husband's arrest from a colleague at the dental practice in National City who saw the news on a local television station at noon. She drove to her parents' house in Spring Valley with both children. She did not return to the house on Imperial Beach Boulevard for 6 weeks. A federal grand jury returned a 14-count indictment against Leonard Darnell George on September 7, 2022, in the Southern District of California. The charges included 1 count of conspiracy to import methamphetamine in violation of Title 21, United States Code, Section 963, 1 count of conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine, 4 counts of bribery of a public official in violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 201, 4 counts of importation of methamphetamine, and 4 counts of unlawful use of an official position by a federal employee. His defense attorney was a former federal public defender named Hector Solis Moran, who had spent 23 years on federal trial work in the Southern District. The defense strategy was, in retrospect, the only strategy available. Solis Moran argued that the encrypted messages on the burner phone, while damning on their face, were not adequately authenticated as having been sent by Leonard George. He argued that the cell site data placing George in the vicinity of cash drop locations was circumstantial. He argued the government had failed to produce a single direct witness who could place Leonard George in the same room as a single dollar of bribery cash. The trial began on May 20th, 2024, before United States District Judge Anita Cordova Ruiz. It lasted 11 trial days. The government called 23 witnesses, including Esteban Rivera, who had pleaded guilty to a reduced trafficking charge in exchange for his cooperation. Rivera testified for 3 hours about the dispatcher in Tijuana, the lane numbers, the hour windows, and the day he had been told lane 6 was good until 10. The government's lead exhibit was the burner phone. Specifically, a 14-month text message log printed and bound into a single exhibit binder approximately 2 inches thick. Page after page of lane assignments, hour windows, dollar figures, and confirmations. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Lin Yuhan, walked the jury through the binder for the better part of a full trial day. $17,000, she said, holding up a single page. That is what the United States of America was worth to this defendant per vehicle. $68,000 for 4 cars in a single month. The price list was in his pocket. He carried it across the border every single morning for 14 months. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 12 minutes. On June 4th, 2024, they returned guilty verdicts on all 14 counts. Sentencing was set for October 25th, 2024. The pre-sentence report calculated a guideline range of 262 to 327 months. The government recommended a sentence at the high end of the range. The defense argued for a downward departure based on Leonard George's lack of prior criminal history, his 15 years of otherwise unblemished federal service, and the impact of incarceration on his 2 children. At the sentencing hearing, the courtroom was full. Vanessa George was in the front row with her sister. Leonard's mother, Patrice, was beside her. His father had died of congestive heart failure in March of 2023, 6 months after Leonard's arrest, without ever seeing his son out of federal custody. Judge Cordova Ruiz read her sentencing statement aloud. Mr. George, you swore an oath to protect the borders of the United States. You took that oath publicly, in a ceremony, in front of your family. For 15 years you wore the uniform and you carried the badge, and you stood in the booth, and the citizens of this country trusted that you were doing the job they were paying you to do. You were not. You were doing the opposite of that job. You were renting out a federal inspection lane to a methamphetamine trafficking organization for $17,000 at a time. You did so knowingly. You did so deliberately. You did so for 14 months. And you did so while the people in this courtroom believed, as everyone in your life believed, that you were a federal officer of the United States in good standing. She paused. I have read the letters submitted on your behalf. I do not doubt that you were, in many respects, a good father, a good husband, and a competent officer. But the harm you have done is structural. It corrodes the trust that every other officer who has ever stood in that booth depends on. 276 months. 276 months. 23 years. Federal prison. No parole. Leonard Darnell George was transported to the Federal Correctional Institution at Terminal Island, a medium-security federal facility on a former naval base in Los Angeles Harbor, where he is scheduled for release in the spring of 2045. He will be 63 years old. His daughter, Amaris, will be 33. His son, Jordan, will be 30. U.S. Attorney Tara McGrath, speaking on the courthouse steps after sentencing, said the corruption at the heart of the case had been, quote, discovered and defeated. The lane Leonard George worked at San Ysidro continues to process approximately 3,000 vehicles per shift. The officers who stand in that booth now wear the same uniform he wore. They carry the same badge. The citizens of the United States trust them in the exact same way they once trusted him. That trust is the only thing the system has. And it is, as Leonard George demonstrated for 14 months and $17,000 at a time, the only thing the system cannot replace. This case was disturbing, but the case on the right-hand side is something else entirely. Click it now.